Don't bring that walking mistake over here. That's how my dad referred to his own grandson, a 5-year-old kid. His words came through the phone speaker while I was driving on the highway, and Colby, the little boy sitting right behind me, heard every single word. If your own family calls your child a mistake, what would you do? Would you keep staying silent? Or would you stand up, even if it means burning every bridge? I chose the second option, and after that night, my parents lost everything. But that wasn't the end, because the ending of the story will blow your mind. Before I get into the details of this story, thank you for choosing to listen to my story today. Hello everyone, I'm Weston, 34 years old. The story I'm about to tell happened on a day in March when I was driving on I-5 toward Seattle Airport. I've been working as a software engineer here for almost 10 years. You know what Seattle weather's like, right? Gray. Always gray. That day was the same. The sky like a wet blanket hanging over our heads, and you're just waiting for it to drop any second. Traffic was crawling inch by inch, typical weekday in the city. Colby was sitting in the back. His little legs were dangling, not touching the car floor, swinging constantly like he had springs built into his body. He was excited because we were about to fly to Denver for Jovi's baby shower, my sister's. While I was trying to squeeze into the right lane, Colby leaned forward and asked, "Dad, can I touch Aunt Jovi's belly later? I want to say hi to the baby." I glanced in the rearview mirror, saw his bright eyes waiting, so I smiled and said, "Sure, but be gentle, okay?" Hearing that, Colby nodded eagerly and said, "I promise. I'll be the best big cousin ever." I smiled at him through the mirror. At that moment, everything was still normal. Then the phone rang. Dad's name showed up on the screen. I was driving, so I hit speakerphone. No greeting, no small talk at all. My dad's cold voice echoed, "Weston, don't come." I blinked, thought I heard wrong. So I asked again, "What? Dad? I'm almost at the airport." But he cut me off immediately. "Are you deaf? Don't bring that walking mistake over here." Then he hung up. The dial tone echoed in the car. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. My head felt empty, just the sound of car horns from somewhere far away. Then a tiny voice from the back seat made my heart clench. "Dad? Was Grandpa talking about me? What's a walking mistake, Dad?" I looked in the rearview mirror. Colby sat there, clutching his stuffed dinosaur tight against his chest like a shield, eyes wide open, confused, waiting for an answer from me. The moment I saw my son's face in the mirror, I knew this wasn't the first time, and if I kept staying silent, it wouldn't be the last. Then, in just an instant, memories from 5 years ago came flooding back, reminding me why my dad hated his own grandson so much. Before Colby was born, on paper, I had everything a 30-year-old man could dream of. 6-figure salary, a penthouse overlooking Puget Sound, the kind of place where you wake up every morning and see Mount Rainier from your bedroom window, and a beautiful wife named Sloane, the type of woman who walks into a room and men forget what they were saying. My parents, Grant and Linda, loved Sloane probably more than they loved me, if I'm being honest. Every time we visited home in Denver, Mom would always hug Sloane first, ask how she was doing, how work was going, and if she needed anything. I'd stand there like a houseplant, waiting for my turn to say hello. Once Dad pulled me aside, patted my shoulder, and said, "You're fortunate. She could have chosen anyone. Don't screw this up." I nodded, laughed along. But inside, my stomach twisted. Because behind the doors of that penthouse, our marriage was slowly dying. Sloane and I lived like strangers sharing a bed. She had her world, I had mine, and those two worlds never crossed. We talked about electric bills, about car maintenance schedules, about stuff that anybody could talk to anybody about. But the real questions, like "Are you happy? Are you okay?" nobody opened their mouth. We were both lonely right in our own home. Then Remy showed up. She worked in marketing, not prettier than Sloane, not smarter, nothing special. But there was one thing Remy did that Sloane had stopped doing long ago. She asked how I was doing, and actually listened to the answer. She looked at me like I was a human being, not a walking wallet. One night after a company party with too much alcohol, my reason got blurry. I made the worst decision of my life. The next morning, I woke up with a terrible headache and self-disgust deep in my bones. I swore I'd bury it, pretend it never happened. But 3 months later, Remy called. Her voice shook when she told me, "I'm pregnant." Then she made it clear that she didn't want to be a mother and wasn't ready for that. But she thought I had the right to know. I could have stayed silent. Could have let Remy handle everything herself. But I chose to be honest with Sloane. The night I told her everything, Sloane didn't scream, didn't cry. She just sat there, looking at me like she was watching a bug crawl across the floor. Then she stood up, her voice eerily calm. I knew this marriage was dead for a while, but I didn't think you'd be the one to dig its grave. Sloane left that night, and I didn't blame her because it was all my fault. But what I didn't expect was that my parents would choose her, completely, absolutely, without a second of hesitation. And from that moment, Colby, a child who hadn't even been born yet, was condemned before he opened his eyes to see the world. Blood is thicker than water. Family above all. I grew up hearing those words, but the past 5 years taught me that blood can also be as cold as ice. Throughout the 9 months Remy was pregnant, she thought about not keeping the baby many times. I understood, but week after week, she kept postponing, and by the time she made a decision it was too late. Eventually, Remy gave birth, signed away her parental rights right there in the hospital, then walked out of our lives without looking back once. And Sloane? Divorce papers came in the mail, sent from a law office in Portland. Not a single text, not one phone call to explain. She cut me out of her life clean, as cutting out a tumor. I took that red-faced baby home alone, named him Colby because in Old English, it means from the dark land. The little guy was born during the darkest period of my life, and I wanted him to become the light that emerged from that darkness. The day I called to announce Colby's birth, my dad didn't congratulate me. He just asked one question, voice cold as stone. Do you know what you just did? You traded Sloane for this thing? My mom cried through the entire call. Between her sobs, she told me Sloane was perfect. She loved this family, and you threw it all away. But I still tried. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, I'd book plane tickets, pack for Colby, and fly back to Denver. I told myself time would change everything, that when they saw Colby growing up, they'd love him. I was wrong. The first Christmas after Colby could walk, my parents prepared gifts for Kieran and Maisie, Jovi's 2 kids. Remote control car for Kieran, singing doll for Maisie. Colby sat on the floor, watching his cousins open presents, waiting. Nothing for him. When I asked, Mom just shrugged. I don't know what Colby likes. The following year, the whole extended family gathered for photos by the Christmas tree. I carried Colby over, ready to step into the frame. Mom held up her hand to stop me, smiling, but her eyes weren't. Too crowded. Let Colby go play. We'll take a separate one later. No separate photo was ever taken, and I wasn't in that year's family photo either. But the memory that haunts me most was Thanksgiving when Colby was 4. That evening, I walked past the living room and heard Dad talking to my aunt. That little boy? He's complicated. Better not to ask. Then, at the end of dinner, when I asked why, he looked straight into my eyes and said without compromise, You can't force me to love him like I love Kieran and Maisie. He's different. You understand, right? I understood. I understood better than anything else in my life. But I was still foolish enough to keep waiting. Turns out, some wounds don't heal with time. They fester more. For 5 years I endured it, swallowed the humiliation, swallowed the pain, swallowed those contemptuous looks because I thought I deserved to be punished for my past mistakes. But that phone call on the highway was the final limit. Punishing me was one thing, but calling my son a walking mistake was something completely different. After that brief moment with those terrible memories, my mind was like a storm spinning. I pulled over to the side of the road and turned on the hazard lights. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the rage boiling deep in my chest, demanding to break free. I turned off the engine, got out, opened the back door, and crouched down to eye level with him. Colby sat in his booster seat, body shrunk small, stuffed dinosaur pressed tight against his chest, chin tucked down. His red-rimmed eyes looked at me, full of fear and confusion. Then Colby asked me, voice trembling like he was about to cry, Dad, what did I do wrong? That question went straight to my heart. Sharp pain. A 5-year-old shouldn't have to ask something so awful. Shouldn't sit there wondering why Grandpa hates him so much. The moment I saw him curled up in that booster seat, Something inside me collapsed completely. But from that wreckage, something else was rising, hard as stone, cold as steel. I reached out, took his tiny hand, squeezed it gently, and said to Colby, "Look at me." He looked up, eyes brimming with tears. I took a deep breath and continued, "You didn't do anything wrong. Listen to me clearly. You're not at fault for anything. I'm the one who made mistakes before, but not you. Never you." Colby's lips quivered. Voice choked as he asked again. "But Grandpa said." I shook my head, cutting him off, and whispered, "Grandpa was wrong. You're the most wonderful thing in my life, and I promise to remind you of that every single day." After hearing that, I unbuckled Colby's seatbelt, and he immediately threw himself into my arms. Two little arms wrapped tight around my neck, face buried in my shoulder. I held him, sitting there on the shoulder of I-5, cars roaring past, and in my head there was only one thought: enough. We still went to the airport, still boarded the flight to Denver. But not to attend Jovi's baby shower. On the plane, Colby fell asleep, head leaning against my arm. I sat watching him, watching his curved eyelashes flutter gently with each breath, watching his small hand still gripping the tail of his stuffed dinosaur. This child deserved to be loved, not called a mistake. As the plane cut through gray clouds, I leaned my head back, closed my eyes, and made plans. When the plane wheels touched the Denver runway, I would show them what a fundamental mistake looked like. 7 o'clock at night. The taxi stopped in front of the Denver house, the house I'd visited dozens of times but never truly been welcomed at. From the outside, the house looked like a picture-perfect family home. Lights blazing from every window, cars parked tight on both sides of the street, laughter and chatter echoing out to the sidewalk. Through the living room glass, I saw pink and blue balloons hanging everywhere. A big banner with "Welcome Baby" stretched across the wall. Must have been 30 or 40 people in there, holding glasses, smiling bright. I sat in the taxi, not rushing to open the door. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my mind was colder and clearer than ever. Then I turned to look at Colby sitting beside me. He'd just woken up from his nap, eyes still sleepy, arms still hugging his stuffed dinosaur. I whispered to him, "Colby, it might get a little loud in there. There might be some yelling. But whatever happens, remember what I told you this morning?" Colby nodded, voice small as he answered, "I didn't do anything wrong." I smiled, ruffled his hair, and said quietly, "That's right. Good job. You're my superhero." After I was done talking to him, I paid the taxi driver and helped Colby out of the car. His small hand gripped mine tight as we stopped in front of the oak door, listening to the soft music and lively conversation inside. My hand touched the brass door handle, ice cold. I didn't knock. I turned the handle and walked straight in. The lavishly decorated living room appeared before my eyes. Long table covered with white cloth, loaded with pastel-wrapped gifts. Cupcake trays arranged in a pyramid. Fruit platters, cheese plates, and champagne glasses are sparkling everywhere. Everyone was laughing and talking, having fun, enjoying the perfect party. Then someone saw me. The laughter died down. Like a domino effect, people turned around one by one, and silence spread throughout the room. For a few seconds, only the background music from the Bluetooth speaker in the corner kept playing. Jovi stood in the middle of the room, 7 months pregnant, holding a glass of orange juice. My sister's face went pale when she saw me, mouth moving silently. "Weston." Right then, my dad came out from the kitchen, still holding a beer can. When he saw me, his face turned red, veins bulging in his neck. Then he roared, "Are you deaf? I told you not to come." My mom appeared right after, her eyes widening when she saw Colby standing beside me. She turned to me, voice sharp, "Weston, why did you bring the boy here?" Colby pressed close to my leg, his small hand gripping tighter. I could feel him shaking, but I stood straight, looked directly into my parents' eyes, voice so calm it surprised even me. "Tonight I need to talk to you, Mom, Dad, and Jovi, in front of everyone." The whole room seemed to hold its breath. 30-something people stood frozen, still holding their glasses, eyes glued to us, nobody knowing what was about to happen, including my parents. They didn't know that after tonight, their lives would never be the same. I walked to the center of the room. Colby still held my hand, following with small steps, silent and scared. His strength came from I don't know where. Maybe after so many times being ignored, he'd learned to shrink into himself. Or maybe from times at school when he was asked why Grandma and Grandpa never picked him up like other kids' grandparents. Or simply because he trusted what I'd told him in the taxi. After a few steps, I stopped right in the middle of the living room, directly under the banner swaying gently in the breeze from the window. The entire room was glued to me. I heard my heart pounding wildly in my chest, but my voice stayed steady as I spoke. I'm Weston, Jovi's brother, and this is Colby, my son. I placed my hand on his soft hair. Then I told them no beating around the bush, no hiding. I said 30 strangers in that room about this morning's phone call. About my dad's ice-cold voice through the speakerphone. About the words he used to describe his 5-year-old grandson. Whispers rose. A woman in a floral dress put her hand to her chest, eyes wide with shock. The man standing by the bar shook his head and set down his glass. I took a breath and continued. I'm not standing here pretending I'm innocent. 5 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I betrayed my wife. I destroyed my own family, and I don't deserve to be forgiven for that. I paused, swallowing the dryness in my throat, then continued. But Colby isn't a mistake. He didn't choose the circumstances he was born into. He's just a kid who wants his grandparents to hug him, wants his name called at family parties, wants to be in Christmas photos like Kieran and Maisie. Suddenly, Colby tugged gently on my hand. I bent down, saw him looking up at me, eyes brimming with tears, lower lip trembling. Then he turned to look at his grandfather, voice small as wind through a crack in the door. Grandpa, do you love me? I'll be good. Promise. The entire room froze. I felt like someone had just sucked all the air out of my lungs. My chest ached from my son's pleading words. I knelt, hugged Colby for a second, whispered in his ear. You're already so good. You don't need to promise anything. Then I stood up, looked straight at my dad, giving him one last chance. I'm only asking you for one thing. Look into Colby's eyes. Tell him he's not at fault. Just one sentence. The room fell into absolute silence. Background music still played. Some upbeat pop song completely out of place with the tension thick as piano wire. Someone cleared their throat. A glass clinked against a plate, the sound ringing out sharply. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. Half a minute. My dad said nothing. He stood there, eyes glaring at me, jaw clenched tight. Then he laughed. A dry, cold laugh. He looked at me, eyes full of contempt, then said, Who do you think you are? Bringing this kid here to make a scene and demanding I apologize? He stepped forward, the beer can in his hand crushed, liquid spilling onto the floor. Let me tell you something. I have nothing to apologize for. That kid is living proof of your disgusting failure. Colby pressed tight against my leg. I felt both of us trembling. I glanced at my mom. She stood by the cupcake table, eyes downcast, hands clasped tight. Not a word, not a movement. Jovi had backed deep into the corner, hiding behind her husband, Marcus, one hand on her pregnant belly like she was protecting herself from the storm happening. Nobody spoke up. Nobody defended the 5-year-old trembling with fear in the middle of the room. I nodded slowly. A strange calmness spread through my body, like all the anger, pain, and disappointment of the past 5 years was crystallizing into something solid, cold, and unbreakable. I looked at my dad and said, All right, then you should know something. I raised my voice so the whole room could hear clearly. This house, where everyone is standing right now, doesn't belong to my parents. My dad froze. The contemptuous smile on his lips died. Then I continued. I told everyone in that room the truth. About how the house they were standing in didn't belong to my parents. About 5 years ago, the bank was about to foreclose, and I put up the money to repurchase it. Regarding my name on the ownership papers, I have been paying the mortgage every month, and I let them live there free for all these years without asking for anything. About how they still considered this house theirs, still threw parties, still had guests without ever saying thank you once. About the $2,000 I sent every month. So my parents had spending money, entertainment money, and shopping money. My dad's face grew pale. My mom put her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with shock, probably because I dared speak up. Whispers rose throughout the room like waves crashing. I heard someone gasp, "Oh my God," and another person ask, "Is this real?" But that wasn't all. I turned to Jovi. My sister was standing there, stunned, her hand gripping tight to her husband's arm. I looked straight into her eyes and said, "And you, Jovi, $50,000 for the down payment on the townhouse last year. You told Marcus it was money from Mom and Dad. But you and I both know that was money I lent you. There's a contract. It's notarized, with your signature on it." Marcus turned to look at his wife, his face changing color. You said that money was a gift from your parents?" Jovi didn't answer, her face white as a sheet. And in the moment when I'd exposed everyone in my family, that was also when I ended it all. "So this is my decision," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. The whole room was still sunk in silence, nobody daring to move. I took a deep breath, felt the cold air fill my lungs, then looked straight into my dad's eyes and declared, "This house, I'm selling it." Each word dropped into the room like a bomb. My dad stood frozen, eyes wide. He tried to open his mouth to say something, but only managed a few stammered sounds. You wouldn't dare." I cut him off, voice unwavering. "I wouldn't dare. I am doing it. My name's on the papers, did you forget?" Right then, the sound of running footsteps thundered down the stairs. Kieran and Maisie, Jovi's two kids, burst into the living room like two little tornadoes. They were running and giggling, clearly having overheard something from upstairs. Kieran, the 7-year-old, ran straight to Colby, face scrunched up teasingly. "Walking mistake. Walking mistake. Grandpa said you're a walking mistake." Maisie, 5 years old, ran after him, clapping and shouting. "Walking mistake. Nana. Colby's a walking mistake." Colby stood frozen next to me, face pale, eyes wide with tears. His lips trembled, trying not to cry. Marcus was the first to react. He quickly walked over to the two kids, one hand grabbing Kieran's arm, the other on Maisie's shoulder, voice stern. "Both of you go to your room, now." Kieran started to argue. "But Dad," Grandpa said. Marcus cut him off, voice harder. "I said go to your room, now." He pulled the two kids out of the living room and pushed them toward the stairs. Before disappearing around the corner, Marcus glanced back at me once. Not a hostile look. Something more like embarrassment, even shame. At least he had some decency, unlike the rest of the people in this room. I stepped forward, gently placed my hand on Colby's shoulder, and pulled him behind me. Then I turned back to face my dad. Asked, "You see that? Even the kids learned how to despise Colby, because you taught them that way." He stood there, face bright red, and of course, couldn't say anything. But my mom was different. She rushed over, both hands grabbing my arms, her nails digging deep into my flesh through my shirt. She cried, tears streaming down, voice pleading desperately. "Weston, you can't. I've lived here 20 years. This is my home." I looked down at her hands gripping tight, then slowly looked up, looked straight into Mom's eyes, and answered, "Your home? The house where your own grandson gets called a mistake? The house where you stood silent, watching two kids tease Colby without saying a word?" My mom let go of my arms as she just touched fire. I continued, voice echoing throughout the room. "You have 30 days to move out. I've already contacted a real estate agent. The Denver market's hot. This house will have buyers within a month." At that moment, my dad stepped forward, veins bulging in his neck, finger pointing straight at my face. "You ungrateful brat. I raised you, fed you, sent you to school so you could turn around and throw me out on the street?" I didn't step back, didn't blink, answered, "You raised me. True. But for the past 5 years, who's been helping you?" "Me." I turned to Jovi, asked, "And you?" $50,000 for the house down payment. The notarized loan. You have 6 months to pay it back." Jovi stood there, face pale, and couldn't say a word. After I finished speaking, I bent down and picked up Colby. He wrapped himself tight around me, face buried in my neck, whole body trembling. I held him tight, felt his little heart pounding against my chest. I turned back to look at the room, said my final words. This child didn't ask to be born. This child isn't at fault for anything. And I, even if I have to burn everything down, will not let my son grow up believing he doesn't deserve to exist. Then I looked at my parents, declared, You want to punish me? Go ahead. But not Colby. Never, Colby. I turned around and walked toward the door. Behind me, my mom screams, my dad shouts. But I didn't turn back. Because from the moment I stepped out of that house, I knew there was no going back. The days after that, my phone was like a supermarket clearance sale. Relatives split into two camps. Half called me ungrateful, forgetting who raised me. The other half stayed silent, or sent roundabout texts like your parents are old. Let it go. I read all those messages and smiled. A bitter smile. For the past 5 years, when my parents had financial troubles, none of them lifted a finger to help. When Colby was treated like trash, nobody spoke up to defend him. But when trouble hit, they all jumped out to judge. I turned off my phone. Didn't answer anyone. Monday morning, I called a real estate agent in Denver and requested to list the house as soon as possible. At the same time, I had a lawyer send official notice to my parents' address and Jovi's address. Everything was legal, clear, and nothing to argue about. Maybe that was the price they had to pay for not being able to say 2 words, "I'm sorry," to a 5-year-old. That Thursday, someone made an offer. Saturday, we closed the deal, $675,000. Faster than I expected. My mom sent dozens of messages. She went on about 20 years of memories in the house that used to belong to them, about how much she sacrificed to raise me. But in all those long, rambling lines, she never mentioned Colby once. Not one apology. And after all that, I blocked Mom's number, blocked Dad's number, blocked Jovi's number, and blocked all the relatives trying to play judge and jury with my life. 30 days later, my parents moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in the cheap area east of Denver. I heard my dad had to work night security, 63 years old, standing guard from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. As for the $50,000 debt, Jovi couldn't pay it back. Eventually, my sister had to sell the townhouse, losing nearly $20,000 after fees. Marcus sent me an apology text, saying he didn't know things were that bad. I didn't reply, not out of hatred, but because I was too tired of people who only showed up after everything had fallen apart. As for Colby, I spent more time with him. Sometimes I still caught glimpses of sadness in his eyes when he saw other kids out with their grandparents. But I knew time would heal. Thanksgiving, we didn't have extended family to go to, but we had friends and colleagues. I invited a few close friends over, we cooked turkey together, watched football, and laughed until late at night. Colby ran around with my coworkers' kids, laughter filling our small apartment. Christmas, Colby and I decorated the tree ourselves. He hung the sparkly ornaments, and I untangled the string lights. The next morning, he opened presents under the tree, eyes bright when he saw the new dinosaur set. No extended family, but we had each other. New Year's Eve, I carried Colby out to the balcony. Father and son counting down together and watching fireworks explode over the Seattle sky. He leaned his head on my shoulder, whispered, "Dad, this year was enjoyable." I held him tighter, feeling relieved. Just the two of us. And strangely, those were the most peaceful holidays. But life always has its surprises. And nearly a year later, I ran into someone I never thought I'd see again. Yesterday at Green Lake Park, life surprised me once again. In the afternoon, Seattle unexpectedly saw some sun after days of drizzle. The air was still crisp, breath coming out in thin puffs of vapor, but the rare sunshine made the whole park seem to glow. I sat on the familiar stone bench, hot coffee warming my hands, eyes following Colby as he played in the playground. He was almost 6 now, taller, more agile, and most importantly, laughing more. He didn't ask about Grandma and Grandpa anymore. Then a voice called out behind me. "Weston?" My heart seemed to skip a beat. I turned around. Sloan, my ex-wife, stood there, but not the bitter, cold Sloan from my memories. She'd cut her hair short and neat, cheeks flushed pink from the cold, and in those eyes was something I'd never seen before. Peace. Beside her was a little girl about 4 years old, blonde hair in 2 pigtails, a red knit hat on her head, gripping her mom's hand tightly, her round eyes looking at me with curiosity. Sloan smiled gently, then introduced her to me. "This is Piper, my daughter." Seeing my surprise, she explained, "I adopted Piper over a year ago, after I realized I didn't need a man to have a family." Right then, Colby ran over, cheeks red from playing, breath puffing out in vapor. He stopped short when he saw the stranger, stood next to me, still holding his old stuffed dinosaur. Piper saw the dinosaur, her eyes lit up. Then she called out to Colby, "Wow, you have a dinosaur." Colby looked up and answered, "Yeah, this is Rex. He's been my buddy since I was really little." Piper excitedly told Colby, "I love dinosaurs too. I have a stegosaurus at home." Then, without waiting for permission, the little girl grabbed Colby's hand and pulled him away. "Will you play on the slide with me? Come on." Colby turned back to look at me, eyes asking permission. I nodded and smiled. He grinned big and ran after the little girl. Sloane and I stood there watching the two kids play. After a moment of awkward silence between us, Sloane spoke. "I heard about what you did with your parents. First, I thought you were crazy." She paused, looked toward Piper, then continued, "But then I thought about it. If someone dared call Piper that way, I'd probably burn down the world, too. Being a mom changes how you see things." Then she turned to me and asked, "Are you okay?" I answered, "I'm good. For the first time in years, I'm excellent." Sloane nodded, replied, "Me too. Turns out happiness wasn't where I thought it would be." Then we were quiet again, but this time it was a peaceful silence. No resentment, no discomfort, just sitting together, smiling as we watched Colby and Piper chasing each other around the playground. When Piper tripped, and Colby quickly ran over to help her up, both of them laughed over something only kids could understand. This may be how life works. There are people we once loved, once hurt, once thought we'd never see again. Then one day, we stand beside them, and everything's different. No more pain, no more anger, just the calm of people who found their own paths. When it got dark, it was time to go home. Piper ran over, one hand gripping Colby's tight, voice pleading with her mom. "Mom, Colby's so fun. Can we see him again next time?" Colby also turned to me, eyes bright, said loudly, "Dad, Piper's really sweet." Sloane and I looked at each other, and both of us started laughing. She suggested to me, "Maybe we could let the kids play together sometimes, if you want." I looked at Colby holding Piper's hand, then nodded. "Maybe, if the kids want to." Sloane led Piper away. The little girl turned back, waving continuously. "Bye, Colby." Colby waved back. "Bye, Piper." I watched the mother and daughter disappear down the lakeside path. My heart felt a little stirred. Maybe it was happiness because all four of us were at peace. My story ends here. If you ask me what lessons I learned from this story, I'll tell you 3 things. First, if someone you love is being treated like they don't exist, don't stay silent to keep the peace. Peace bought with dignity isn't worth it. Second, blood doesn't automatically mean family. A real family is people who choose to love you unconditionally. And third, sometimes ending one chapter isn't a tragedy. It's how life opens up better new chapters. If it were you, what would you do in my situation? Let me know in the comments. And if this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and like the video to help me share more stories. Thank you for listening. See you in the following stories. At my dad's 60th birthday party, with a cold voice echoing throughout the room, he said the words that left me speechless. "Michael, he's my shame. Son of a traitor and a woman who works with dead bodies. What do you think I have to be proud of?" After Dad's words, I turned to look at Michael, my 9-year-old son. My child's face went pale, his lips trembling. He didn't understand why Grandpa said that, but a child's instincts were enough for Michael to feel the pain in every word. In my chest, each heartbeat pounded so hard it felt like it wanted to tear right out. My throat tightened. My hands unconsciously clenched on my thighs to keep myself from shaking. In that moment, I understood that silence was no longer an option. Before I delve into the details, I would like to thank you for taking the time to read my story today. Have a wonderful day. Give me a like if you'd also like to wish me good things. Hello everyone. My name is Daniel Harper, 35 years old. Currently, I'm living with my wife, son, and my grandfather in a place where no one in my old family knows about. The story I'm telling today happened 2 years ago. Everything changed on an afternoon in early June 2023. That day, around 3 p.m., when I was sitting working in my room, the phone suddenly rang. The screen showed a familiar name, Patricia, my mom. The moment I saw the call, an uneasy feeling flashed through me. After a few seconds of hesitation, I answered. Without waiting for me to say hello, Mom's voice rang out. Daniel, your dad's turning 60. The whole extended family will gather together next Wednesday. Please bring your wife and son to the party. Your grandfather wants to see you all too. Right after hearing Mom's suggestion, I was stunned for a few seconds. This was the first time in years she'd actively invited my whole family back in such a polite way. A fragile hope rose in my heart. I thought time had softened everything. I thought time had changed Mom's attitude toward me, my wife, and my son. That evening, when my son was fast asleep, I told my wife about Mom's call. After listening, Grace was quiet for a long time. Then she turned to look at me and gently said, Daniel, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Every time we see them, I have to listen to cruel words. I can handle it, but I'm afraid Michael will get hurt. Hearing what my wife said, I sighed, took her hand, and whispered, I know, I'm worried too. But this time, Mom actively invited us. Her voice was completely different than usual. Maybe they've changed. Right after I finished speaking, Grace looked at me with skeptical eyes and asked, Do you really believe that? I couldn't answer that question. Instead, I just squeezed my wife's hand tighter and told her, Let's try it once and see. If anything happens, we'll leave right away. Grace sighed, then nodded slightly and said, All right, but promise me. I promised her that. But deep down, I still had a bad feeling. I didn't expect that feeling would become reality in such a brutal way. On Wednesday, mid-June 2023, we drove from Portland to Bellevue, Washington, where my parents live. The trip lasted nearly 4 hours. Throughout the journey, complex emotions continued to surge in my heart. When I turned onto the familiar road leading to the Harper family neighborhood, my heart beat faster. The large 2-story house with a spacious yard appeared before my eyes. Dozens of luxury cars were already parked outside. Mercedes, BMW, Lexus, symbols of the wealth that the Harper extended family always took pride in. The moment I saw that scene, a heavy feeling rushed over me. I realized this wasn't a small family party. This was a display of power by the entire clan. Stepping into the familiar house, dozens of guests in expensive outfits were chatting animatedly. As soon as they saw us walk in, Aunt Megan immediately turned to whisper to Aunt Linda, Oh God, here comes the morgue wife again. No shame at all. Right after Megan's comment, Linda chuckled softly, then replied, Hope she didn't bring the formaldehyde smell. If the guests smell that, it'll embarrass the whole house. Right then, I realized they were purposely speaking just loud enough for us to hear. A simmering anger began to form within me. Trying to stay calm, I looked at my wife. I saw her shoulders slump slightly, but she still tried to keep smiling. Her hand gripped Michael's tightly, as if seeking strength from the little child. My wife's expression at that moment broke my heart. When I was about to speak up in protest, my wife gently tugged my hand and shook her head, signaling me to hold back. I understood my wife didn't want me to argue with the family at this birthday party. Not wanting to complicate things further, I listened to my wife, trying to endure the cruel words of the relatives. About 1 minute later, my mom finally noticed my presence. My mom approached and gave me a quick hug. Her eyes swept over Grace with the familiar coldness. When she looked down at Michael, she just nodded and said nothing more. No hug for my son. At this point, Michael shyly hid behind my wife's back, his big, round eyes looking up at Grandma with amazement. A few seconds later, Michael softly spoke up, Hello, Grandma. After Michael's greeting, my mom didn't respond, just turned away to attend to other guests. Mom's indifference made my blood boil, and I realized Mom hadn't changed at all. She was still cold toward my wife and son. After Mom left, I squeezed my wife's hand tightly, turned to her and whispered, Let's go. This place doesn't belong to us. My wife hesitated after my suggestion. A few seconds later, she replied, "If we leave now, your parents and relatives will have reasons to cause trouble for us." I understood what my wife was saying. She didn't want me to be in a difficult position, but I was determined to leave, and I wouldn't change that decision. Just as I turned around and was about to pull my wife and son away from the party, someone approached us with a warm smile. It was my grandfather, William Harper. He was 83 that year. He walked over with his cane, his old but still sharp eyes lighting up when he saw Michael. He bent down, patted the boy's head, and said in a warm, deep voice, "Is this my great-grandson? The boy's so handsome." Right after Grandpa's compliment, Michael suddenly burst into laughter, shy but happy. That was the first time that evening I saw my son truly joyful. My wife then turned to me and whispered, "Stay at the party. Don't make Grandpa William sad." After my wife's words, I looked at Grandpa, and I decided to stay at the party instead of leaving right away. And that was the biggest mistake of my life. Right at 6 o'clock, when all the guests had arrived, everyone sat down at the banquet table. The spacious dining room was elegantly decorated, with a long table covered with pristine white cloth, on which were dishes ordered from a 5-star restaurant. And just as I had predicted throughout that birthday dinner, the old script repeated itself. The conversation revolved around the brilliant achievements of the Harper extended family like an endless carousel. Victoria bragged about a complex heart surgery she just successfully performed, her clinic becoming increasingly famous with an interminable waiting list of patients. After the story, my mom clapped and said to my sister, "Victoria is so talented. I'm so proud of you." After Victoria's bragging, it was Uncle Robert's turn to boast about a $1 million real estate project he'd just signed. Aunt Linda talked about a new restaurant branch about to open. Aunt Megan excitedly announced a hugely successful marketing campaign. Each success story was celebrated with applause and cheerful laughter. And us? No one asked how my work was going, nor did anyone inquire about Grace's well-being. Michael sat silently next to my wife, his confused eyes looking at the strange adults. Throughout the first hour of the party, my family was like silent ghosts, occasionally nodding and smiling mechanically when looked at. Around 8 o'clock, when everyone had finished eating, my dad stood up, raising his glass of red wine. His eyes swept across the room with the smugness of a powerful man being honored. Right then, Uncle Robert asked loudly, "Richard, I heard you have a grandson. Where is he? Why don't you introduce him to everyone?" After that question, my dad's eyes turned toward Michael. My son was sitting silently next to Grace, his hand gripping the edge of my wife's shirt. His eyes lit up when he heard everyone mention him, as if waiting for a compliment. But instead of praise and pride, my dad laughed mockingly. He glanced at Grace with contemptuous eyes, then turned back to the crowd. And then, when everyone was waiting for an answer, with a cold voice echoing throughout the room, he said the words that left me speechless. "Michael? He's my shame. Son of a traitor and a woman who works with dead bodies. What do you think I have to be proud of?" The moment his words fell, the room suddenly erupted in whispers. Some people laughed in agreement. Some shook their heads as if they'd known all along. Aunt Megan even added, "That's right. Daniel should have been dealt with more firmly from the beginning." After Dad's words, I turned to look at Michael. My child's face went pale, his lips trembling. He didn't understand why Grandpa said that, but a child's instincts were enough for Michael to feel the pain in every word. Grace sat beside him, gripping his hand tight, her eyes red but trying to stay calm. In my chest, each heartbeat pounded so hard it felt like it wanted to tear right out. My throat tightened, my hands unconsciously clenched on my thighs to keep myself from shaking. In that moment, I understood that silence was no longer an option. While I was still sitting speechless from Dad's words, Victoria suddenly stood up. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. With a mocking tone, she continued Dad's words. "Dad's right. Daniel should have listened long ago and made his wife quit her job to work at my clinic. Now it's too late." As soon as those words ended, Uncle Robert nodded in agreement and continued. "Exactly. We advised him numerous times, but he wouldn't listen. Now the whole family has to bear the shame because of him." Right when those words rang out, A slight sound reached my ears. Michael was crying. The boy buried his face in his mother's shoulder, his small shoulders shaking in waves. The sound of his choked sobs was like a knife stabbing straight into my heart. Not wanting to let my son be oppressed, I slowly stood up. Every eye in the room turned toward me. With a calm but steely voice, I looked straight at Dad and asked loudly, "You call my son a shame? You call your own grandson a shame? Older man, you're 60 years old. How can you be so cruel to a child who's only 9? You're worse than animals. At least animals have compassion. But you're cold-blooded." My words made my dad furious. He threw the wine glass in his hand straight at me and screamed, "How dare you talk to your father like that?" Luckily, I dodged it. The wine glass flew past my shoulder, shot backward, and crashed into the wall. The sound of shattering glass rang out piercingly. Red wine splattered everywhere like blood spreading on the white wall. The entire room fell silent for a moment. The moment he grabbed the wine glass and threw it at me, I knew I could never call him Dad again. After Dad's action of throwing the glass, realizing the situation was getting out of control, I turned to my wife and said firmly, "Grace, get Michael to the car. Right now." Grace didn't say a word. She quickly stood up, gripped her son's hand tightly, and walked quickly toward the door. Michael was still crying, his little legs stumbling as he followed my wife, and I stayed back in that room, alone, facing the entire Harper extended family. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. All those years of enduring, all those years of trying to keep the peace, all of it wasn't very sensible. They had crossed my final line. At this point, I walked straight toward my dad. I stood face to face with him. I looked straight into Dad's eyes and said coldly, "Richard, listen to me clearly. From this moment on, you are no longer my father." My dad was so angry his face turned red, the veins in his neck bulging. He roared, "You're a damn liar." Ignoring what he said, I turned to look at all the relatives standing and sitting around. Each face, Uncle Robert, Aunt Linda, Aunt Megan, Victoria, all appeared before my eyes like caricatures of hypocrisy. A few seconds later, I spoke, each word clear and ice cold. I said to them, "And you people, you think you're successful, you're wealthy. But you know what? You're rich in money, but poor in morals and compassion. You're the most pitiful people I've ever met." Immediately, the atmosphere of the entire room exploded like a pot of boiling water. Uncle Robert slammed the table, yelling in my face, "This kid is way out of line. Richard, cut his name out of the will." Aunt Linda wouldn't back down either, her voice shrill. "That's right. Even giving him a penny would be a waste." Aunt Megan chimed in, "I told you so. We never should have let him in the house." Hearing those words, I burst out laughing. A cold and contemptuous laugh. I looked straight at Uncle Robert and replied, "The will? I don't need his will. I don't need a penny from this family either. You think I'm after your money?" My words were like pouring oil on fire, but I didn't stop. I took a deep breath, then gritted out each word. "From this moment, I declare I'm cutting ties with all of you. I'm no longer part of the Harper family." Hearing what I said, Victoria laughed mockingly, her voice full of sarcasm. "Oh, is my little brother putting on a show? Who do you think you are to cut ties with the family?" I turned to her, my eyes like cutting knives. I replied, "Who am I? I'm the only person in this room who still has a conscience. And you people? You're vultures. A bunch of vultures who only know how to gang up and bully a 9-year-old child." The entire room was noisy like a marketplace. Cursing and screaming rang out from everywhere. But I didn't care. I had endured for too long. I glanced over each face red with anger, then spoke my final words, my voice cold like reading a verdict. "Listen here, all of you. Curse all of you. Cruel people like you will have ugly deaths later. No one will do your makeup when you're 6 feet under. People who work in mortuary makeup, like my wife, will stay away from you." The room suddenly fell into silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. The faces looked at me with a range of emotions. Anger, shock, and fear. I said nothing more. I turned around and walked toward the door. Behind me, my dad's voice roared, "Get out! Don't ever come back here again." I didn't turn my head back. I just kept walking straight to the door. When I was about to step out the door, a powerful voice rang out. It was my grandfather's voice, William Harper. and everything still wasn't over. Throughout that party, Grandpa sat quietly in the corner of the room, observing everything with his old but sharp eyes. When he witnessed the chaos that had just occurred, he slowly stood up. His cane trembled slightly with the shaking of his hand. His old eyes swept over each face, then stopped at my dad. In that silence taut as a guitar string, Grandpa's voice rang out, asking my dad, "Richard, what did you just say about my great-grandson?" My dad stammered, his voice hurried in reply, "Dad, this is my business." Not letting my dad finish, Grandpa cut him off. He yelled loudly, "Shut up!" The entire room fell silent. No one dared make a sound before the 83-year-old man standing straight like an ancient oak tree. A few seconds later, Grandpa turned to look at me, his voice softening as he said to me, "Daniel, go get Grace and Michael from the car and bring them in. Let me talk to them." I nodded, hurriedly stepped outside. Grace and Michael were sitting in the car, the boy still sobbing in my wife's arms. I opened the car door, gently said to them, "Come inside. Grandpa wants to see us." After what I said, Grace wiped Michael's tears, coaxed him to stop crying so we could see my grandpa together. When we returned to the living room, Grandpa was already standing in the middle of the room, facing the entire Harper extended family. Seeing Michael, he bent down, his wrinkled hand gently stroking Michael's hair. His voice softened, warm as he said, "Don't be scared. Great-grandpa's here. You have nothing to be ashamed of." After comforting Michael, Grandpa stood up straight and turned back to face his children. His eyes coldly swept over each person, missing no one. And then, Grandpa's voice rang out, hoarse but strong. He said to them, "I've lived 83 years. I built the foundation for this family with my bare hands. I thought I'd taught my children about compassion, about respect. But tonight, I realize I failed." Grandpa's words made my parents and the others bow their heads in silence. A few seconds later, Grandpa took a deep breath, then continued, "A 9-year-old child, my great-grandson. The boy came here happy to see his grandparents, and what did you do? You called him a shame. You insulted his mother just because she works a job you consider lowly." Grandpa's words warmed my heart. I looked over at my wife and Michael. My wife gently raised her hand to cover her mouth, her eyes starting to well up with tears. Suddenly, Grandpa turned to look straight at my dad's face, his voice steely as he said to my dad, "Richard, you're the eldest son. You should set an example for the whole family. Yet you were the first to spew the most venomous words. You threw a wine glass at your son. You're heartless." Then he turned to Victoria, Uncle Robert, Aunt Linda, Aunt Megan, his eyes like cutting knives. He said to them, "And you people, you think you're successful, you're intellectuals. You have companies, clinics, and restaurant chains. But you don't have an ounce of humanity. You ganged up like a pack of vultures to bully a 9-year-old child." After saying that, Grandpa slammed his cane hard on the floor, the sound of wood hitting stone ringing out harshly. The entire room shuddered. And then he said loudly, "Now, I demand that all of you, everyone, stand up and apologize to Daniel, apologize to Grace, and apologize to Michael. Right now." Silence stretched after Grandpa's demand. No one moved. A few seconds later, my dad was the first to speak up. He stubbornly replied, "Dad, I don't think I was wrong. I was telling the truth. I will never apologize." Right after that, Victoria chimed in. She said, "Grandpa, we respect you. But don't make us apologize to a woman who does makeup on dead bodies. We can't do it." Uncle Robert also nodded in agreement, his voice contemptuous as he added, "That's right. I'll never apologize to someone who does that disgusting job." Aunt Linda shrugged, dropping a cold comment. "Dad, this has nothing to do with me." Aunt Megan turned her face away, not bothering to look at Grandpa, not saying another word. Not one person stood up. Not one person apologized. Right then, my dad stepped forward, looked straight at my face, and gritted his teeth. "Daniel, you are where you are today because of your wife. She chose a job that all of society fears. Who can you blame? Blame yourself." The moment those words ended, I saw Grandpa trembling, not from weakness, but from rage. And that's when I saw Grandpa's genuine anger. After my dad's insulting words, Grandpa gripped his cane tight, his old eyes suddenly blazing like they were on fire. His voice choked as he asked my dad, You dare say that? Then, before anyone could react, he stepped straight up to my dad's face. His steps were no longer slow, as they had been a few minutes before. As if the rage had given new strength to that old body, he moved as quickly as a 50-year-old man. With all his strength, he swung the cane high and struck straight at my dad's back. The sound of the cane hitting flesh rang out harshly. My dad staggered forward, his face hitting the chair. He screamed in pain, "Dad, are you crazy?" Grandpa hit his legs, his butt, and his back. He yelled loudly, "Where are you running? If you're so tough, stand up and fight me back." My dad didn't dare hit Grandpa. He could only lie still and take the beating. After beating my dad, Grandpa spun around to Victoria, his eyes red like a wild animal's. Before she could run, the cane swung over, striking straight at her shoulder. Victoria screamed, "Grandpa! Grandpa! Stop!" But Grandpa didn't listen. He continued chasing, the cane in his hand moving like a weapon. He hit Victoria's arms, her back, her legs. She stumbled and fell, rolling on the floor. Uncle Robert saw this and hurriedly ran toward the dining table. But Grandpa was faster. Uncle Robert's heavy body had betrayed him. Grandpa chased after him, the cane swinging nonstop. Uncle Robert dodged one strike, but the second hit straight at his butt. Uncle Robert screamed, falling face first on the floor. Grandpa kicked his back once, then struck with the cane again. Grandpa yelled, "Coward! Only good at bullying children." Aunt Linda saw the dangerous situation and quickly crawled under the dining table, curling up like a mouse. But Grandpa didn't spare her. He bent down, put the cane under the table and struck repeatedly. "You think you can hide from me? Come out!" Grandpa roared, his voice booming like thunder. Aunt Linda cried out, both hands covering her head, constantly begging, "Dad, I was wrong. I was wrong." But Grandpa didn't listen. He kept hitting. The cane knocked against the table legs, against Aunt Linda, against anything within reach. Aunt Megan saw this and quickly ran toward the entrance. But she tripped over a chair leg, falling flat on the floor. Grandpa spun around, walked over to her, and raised the cane. "Where are you running to?" he yelled, then struck the cane down on Aunt Megan's back. Aunt Megan screamed, trying to crawl forward. But Grandpa followed, hitting her 2 more times on her butt and legs. My dad had now struggled to his feet, planning to run into the inner room. But Grandpa seemed to have eyes in the back of his head. He spun around and threw the cane at my dad. The cane hit his leg, making him fall flat on the floor. My mom stood frozen in the corner of the room, her face pale with fear. She didn't dare run, didn't dare speak up. She just stood there, trembling. The luxurious living room now looked like a battlefield. Chairs overturned, tables askew, glasses and cups shattered everywhere. Grandpa's 5 children are groaning in pain. 5 minutes passed like a nightmare. Finally, Grandpa stopped. His breathing was labored, his chest heaving. Sweat poured down his wrinkled face. He turned to look at me, his voice tired but still strong. He said to me, "Daniel, come here and help me. I'm so tired." I quickly ran over to support Grandpa. His body was trembling. He couldn't stand steadily, as if all his strength had been drained after that rage. Michael was more thoughtful than I was. My son ran to pull over a chair, placed it right behind Grandpa and said, "Great-grandpa, please sit down." I helped Grandpa sit down. He was panting, his hands still gripping the cane tight. At this point, Grace quickly poured a glass of water and brought it to Grandpa. Grandpa reached out to take the glass and drank a big gulp. His hand was still shaking, and some water spilled out. Around us, Grandpa's 5 children were still groaning, some crying, some silent and not daring to move. The luxurious living room was now devastated, as if a storm had hit it. After nearly 2 minutes of rest, Grandpa turned back to look at me, his eyes red, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. His voice trembling as he said to me, "Daniel, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Grace. I'm sorry, Michael." Hearing Grandpa apologize, I shook my head, my throat tightening. I said to him, "Grandpa, you have nothing to apologize for." Before I could finish, Grandpa cut me off, his voice pained as he said to us, "No, I'm at fault. I gave birth to these children. I raised them. But I failed. I couldn't teach them how to be human. Grandpa's words made my parents and relatives ashamed. After a while, Grandpa turned to look at Grace, his old eyes full of respect. He said to my wife, Grace, your job is nothing to be ashamed of. You help the departed leave with dignity. You help them look beautiful in their final moments. You help grieving families see their loved ones one last time without being haunted by their loss. That's the work of compassion. That's work not everyone can do. Grandpa's words made Grace cry. She couldn't say anything, just nodded and hugged me. After speaking to my wife, Grandpa stroked Michael's hair, his voice gentle as he said to my son, and you, Michael, remember this. Your mother is the best person. Never let anyone make you ashamed of your mother. Michael nodded, hugging my grandpa tight. After nearly 10 minutes of rest, Grandpa stood up straight and turned to look at the entire extended family one last time. His voice rang out like a verdict. He said to them, from now on, I'm cutting ties with all of you. Never call me Dad again. As for today's incident, if you want to go ahead and sue me for assaulting you, I'm not afraid. As soon as Grandpa finished speaking, my mom screamed in panic, Dad, don't do this. But Grandpa didn't bother to turn back. He slowly walked toward the door, his cane tapping steadily on the stone floor. We followed him out to the car, leaving behind a luxurious house with people standing speechless in confusion and fear. That night, when our car left Bellevue, no one said a word. Michael had fallen asleep in the back seat. Grandpa sat in the passenger seat, his eyes looking out the window, deep in thought. When we got back to our small house in Portland, I helped him into the living room. Grace put Michael to bed, then made hot tea for Grandpa. We sat facing each other in the warm yellow light. After a long while, Grandpa said to me, Daniel, I have a suggestion. I want you to think carefully about it. I waited in silence. A few seconds later, Grandpa said to me, I want you all to leave here. Move somewhere else to live. Somewhere no one in that extended family can find. And I want to go with you. Right after Grandpa finished speaking, I was stunned. Leave Portland? Start over from scratch? That would mean leaving behind work, friends, and everything familiar. I hesitated, my voice getting smaller as I replied, Grandpa, I don't have enough money to do that. Moving to a new place, buying a new house, starting over, I can't. Grandpa looked at me, his old eyes suddenly lighting up with a strange gleam. He smiled slightly, the first smile since leaving the party. He said to me, I have $3 million, Daniel, and I want to give it all to you. The moment those words fell, I was speechless. $3 million, a number I'd never dared dream of. I trembled, not believing my ears. I asked again, Are you serious? Grandpa nodded and continued, Daniel, you're the only grandson who knows how to love and cherish family. Grace is the most decent girl I've ever seen. And Michael, that boy is my only great-grandson. I want this money to belong to you all. Hearing Grandpa's words, I sat quietly, my head spinning. Part of me wanted to refuse, feeling this was too enormous. But when I looked into Grandpa's eyes full of determination and love, I understood he had thought this through very carefully. The next morning, at precisely 8 o'clock, I took Grandpa to the bank branch near our house. In the transaction office, Grandpa calmly completed all the procedures. The bank employee looked at the number on the screen with surprise, but didn't ask anything more. In just over an hour, the entire $3 million had been transferred to my account. When we stepped out of the bank, Grandpa patted my shoulder, his voice gentle as he said to me, Done. Now we can start over. In that moment, a strange feeling surged in my heart. It wasn't joy from having money. It was relief, like a huge burden had just been lifted from my shoulders. In the following week, everything happened quickly like a whirlwind. I quit my job, put the Portland house up for sale, and packed up our belongings. Grace contacted the funeral home to give notice of the passing. We didn't tell anyone about our plans. And then, on an early morning at the end of August 2023, when the sun was peeking out, my small family and Grandpa quietly left Portland. The car carried everything we needed for a new life. Before leaving, I had changed everything: phone number, email address, social media accounts. I erased every trace that could lead to where we were going. The Harper extended family would never find us. We moved to a small town in another state, a peaceful place with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. I won't reveal the town's name, because that's a secret my family wants to keep forever. With the money Grandpa gave us, we bought a house with a large yard. Michael has his own room with a window facing maple trees. Grandpa has a room on the first floor, convenient for getting around. Grace found a new job at a local funeral home. The difference is here, no one judges her for her profession. The neighbors are aware of what Grace does, and they respect her. Someone even said to me, "Your wife does such meaningful work. She helps families like ours during the most difficult times." The moment Grace heard those words, she cried. It was the first time in years she'd been recognized for her work. Michael began attending a new school. The boy adapted quickly, made new friends, and most importantly, he no longer has to hear cruel words about his mother. And Grandpa? He adapted to the new life surprisingly well. Every afternoon, he sits on the porch, watching Michael play in the yard, a kind smile spreading across his lips. He tells me these are the happiest days of his life. More than 2 years have passed since that fateful birthday party. Michael is now 11 years old. The boy has completely recovered from that shock years ago, thanks to his family's love and support. Grace still works at the local funeral home. Colleagues and clients love her. No one talks about her with contempt anymore. And Grandpa? He's still healthy and sharp at 85. Every morning he gets up early, makes coffee, and sits on the porch reading books. Every afternoon he plays chess with Michael in the living room. Every evening, the whole family gathers around the dinner table to share stories from the day. As for my parents and relatives, I have no news of them. To be precise, I've removed them from my life. That's the life we've found. Peaceful, simple, but full of happiness. Through this story, I would like to share 5 pieces of advice with you. First advice: never look down on anyone's profession. Every profession has its own value. There's no lowly job. Only lowly people who look down on others' hard work. Second advice: never insult children. Children are the most innocent and vulnerable souls. One cruel word from an adult can leave a lasting scar on their heart for the rest of their life. Adults might forget what they said, but children will remember forever. Third advice: never anger people like my grandpa. Some people seem gentle and quiet on the outside, but when pushed to their limit, they'll explode in ways no one expects. Fourth advice: a real family does not share blood, but rather those who are willing to stand by you when you need them. And the final advice: never stay silent in the face of injustice, no matter who's causing it. There are times when you have to stand up and say, enough, even if the person facing you is a parent, sibling, or anyone else. When I tell this story, some people have said I made too big a deal of everything. If it were them, after my dad's cruel words, they wouldn't argue. They'd stand up and leave immediately. What do you think about this perspective? Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your emotions, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support me and stay up to date with my upcoming stories. Thank you for following this long story.